Welcome to the boardroom of the National Transportation Safety Board, and thank you for taking part in today's forum, Humans and Hardware, Preventing General Aviation In-Flight Loss of Control. I'm board member Earl Wayner, and it's my privilege to preside over this event. Joining me this morning are Transportation Safety Analyst Christy Dunks and Senior Aviation or Air Safety Investigator Paul Cox. They've worked alongside other NTSB staff for months to bring you this forum. The NTSB staff have lined up exciting speakers and informative presentations for today's event. Our thanks to all of the panelists who are joining us to provide their perspective and considerable expertise. In 2015, the NTSB added prevention of loss of control in flight in general aviation aircraft to its most wanted list of transportation safety improvements in response to some alarming trends and crash statistics. This forum will examine those trends as they relate to fixed-wing aircraft. Since 2008, in the United States, almost 3,000 people have died in general aviation fixed-wing crashes, and almost half of those deaths involve loss of control. Although the airline industry has improved their accident rate in the U.S. by almost 80% over the last decade, the general aviation industry has not seen the same level of improvements. In the United States, not a single person was lost in scheduled commercial passenger flight in all of 2014. But in general aviation, approximately 420 people have died. The single greatest cause of these fatalities, in-flight loss of control. At the NTSB, we've taken up the challenge of examining loss of control crashes to determine how and why they happen, and we've studied the nature of the loss of control crash when a pilot flies the airplane beyond its critical stall angle of attack, at which point control can be lost. We'll start the forum this morning with a presentation from NTSB's Paul Cox. Mr. Cox will explore the varying factors that can precede a loss of control event in flight. But as Mr. Cox will explain, these factors do not predetermine the crash. Loss of control is, at its core, a human performance issue. Although problems may arise, these aircraft remain flyable. It's the pilot's lack of familiarity with the aircraft, medical or substance impairment, distraction, insufficient training, or failure to act swiftly that, in the end, causes the crash. So today, among other topics, we'll look at the most sophisticated equipment in any piloted airplane, the human brain. How it works, what might impede a pilot from maintaining situational awareness, and how such impediments might be anticipated and countered. We'll also look at the current loss of control training, as well as the importance of enhancing that training. We'll discuss initiatives promoted by the aviation community to prevent in-flight loss of control, and we'll consider what technological solutions might aid pilots in maintaining control of their airplanes. And we will ask the important question, what else can be done? In our final session today, we'll feature questions sent in by those with the best perspective on general aviation flight, the pilots themselves. Before closing, I want to add that most general aviation pilots share my passion and fascination with flying. Many of us trade information readily with other pilots and are quick to discuss the lessons we've learned from our own close calls. Even good pilots can have bad days. It takes only one moment of inattention, a miscalculation, or a mistake to precipitate a loss of control in flight. The best defense is to remain vigilant against the complacency that leads to lax attitudes and dangerous habits. As you listen to the speakers today, I ask that you consider your role in aviation safety, that you resolve to be part of the solution, and that you commit to spreading the word to other pilots. The prevention of loss of control crashes should be a focus of every aviation type club, pilots association, and aircraft-related forum. In the future, we hope to see this on your own Twitter feed or Facebook page. We urge you to continue the conversation when this forum ends. I know that, like me, your greatest incentive is assuring the safety of the people who fly with us and share our airspace. This forum's ultimate success will be measured in the lives that we can save by working together to develop and embrace best practices. To that end, we must have buy-in not only from the experts, but every general aviation pilot. Thank you again for being here today. We'll now hear from Dr. Dunks as she goes over some important safety and logistical information and some information on how to share forum resources electronically. Following that, Mr. Cox will give an opening overview presentation. Dr. Dunks.
Thank you. For safety purposes, please note the nearest emergency exit. You can use the rear doors that you came through to enter the conference center. There is also a set of emergency doors on either side of the stage up front. If you have not already done so, please silence your electronic devices. Today's forum has been designed to draw out the most up-to-date information about loss of control in general aviation, and we hope to draw in general aviation pilots. To that end, we will include questions emailed to us from the pilot community throughout today's panels. There will be 15-minute breaks between panels, and after the second panel, we will break for lunch. For those of you joining us here in the conference center, there are a variety of lunch options in LaFont Plaza. Just take the escalators up one floor and walk straight ahead. Finally, after exploring our 4 panel topics, we'll conclude the day with a roundtable style open discussion to get at cross-cutting questions and to boil down our discussions to some key takeaways. Our staff and panelist bios, as well as the agenda, are available on the forum website at ntsb.gov/LOCFORUM. Handouts with the agenda are also available in the lobby. Because we have a full agenda, we appreciate your cooperation in helping us keep on schedule during panels and breaks. Following the forum, presentations provided by our speakers and a video archive of the webcast will be available on our website. We encourage pilots to share these materials, and we encourage instructors to incorporate them as appropriate into their training. Attendees or others who wish to submit written comments for inclusion in the forum's archive materials may do so until October 23rd. Submissions should directly address one or more of the forum's topic areas and should be submitted electronically as an attached document to locforum@ntsb.gov. For our presenters, immediately following panel 1, we will have a photo just outside the boardroom doors. Now, Mr. Cox will start us off with a brief overview presentation. Following the presentation, he will also serve as the NTSB technical panel lead for our first panel, Industry and Government Perspectives and Actions. Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Dr. Dunks, and good morning, everybody. My brief overview, and it's only about 10 minutes long, it's called General Aviation Fixed Wing In-Flight Loss of Control Overview. And it's a pretty long title, but what does it mean and why are we concerned? We really need to talk about some definitions first. Fixed wing and in-flight are fairly easy to understand, but definitions for general aviation and loss of control can be somewhat problematic. For general aviation, there are differences in international and U.S. definitions of GA. And U.S. government statistics collection criteria differ for what industry might consider GA. In the U.S., there's general agreement that GA includes FAR Part 91 flights, Part 125 large airplane non-airline flights, Part 137 agricultural application flights, and non-military public use flights. There's also agreement that Part 121 and Part 135 scheduled airline flights are excluded as GA. In addition, government entities separate on-demand Part 135 flights from GA in annual surveys of the GA fleet. This presentation does include on-demand Part 135 as part of the GA fleet. Definition of loss of control. If we look at FAR AIM, it's not defined, and if we look at the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, it's also not defined. There's something called the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, and there's something called the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, both of which you'll hear about on panel 1. And they use a common taxonomy definition for loss of control, which is an extreme manifestation of a deviation from intended flight path. It's a little bit of a mouthful. A little simpler way to say that would be the airplane won't go where the pilot wants it to go. The airplane does go where the pilot doesn't want it to go, and it's a surprise when it happens. Some of the NTSB common conventions that we use when we do data collection, loss of control in flight is known as a defining event that best describes the accident scenario. It generally involves an aerodynamically sound airplane. It might not be mechanically sound, but is still controllable. Also noteworthy is that in 2008, NTSB updated its database coding, and thus the accidents presented here are from 2008 through 2014. Results also are provided for U.S. registered airplanes on U.S. soil. If we look at the data from the time period we discussed, 2008-2014, we see we have a total accidents of over 9,750 accidents, total fixed-wing accidents of 8,730. Loss of control in-flight fixed-wing accidents, 1,518, or 17% of all fixed-wing accidents. So 17%, we look at that and we say, that's not such a big deal after all. However, when we get into fatal fixed-wing accidents, we find out of a total of 1,553, that loss of control in flight accounts for 721, or 46%. If we also look at the number of fatalities, we have almost 2,700 fatalities during that time, of which 1,237 are loss of control in flight, or again, almost 46% of all fatalities in the fixed wing. So it's a pretty significant number. We can break this down further by looking at the federal air regulations under which they are flying. As you can see, the green is for all loss of control in flight flights, and the red is for the fatal loss of control in flight flights, and Part 91 far exceeds all of the other ones combined. We can also look at it again as fatalities, and we had almost 1,200 fatalities during that time frame, and all others combined were only 48. Flight purpose, overwhelmingly is personal flight, followed by instructional flight. And incidentally, when I first started looking at this, I was thinking, oh, instructional flight, it must be that student pilot solo, when it's actually the certificated pilot along with the flight instructor most of the times. And then you see the other ones, and they're far less. If we look at lighting conditions, overwhelmingly all accidents, loss of control, 90% are daytime, and fatal accidents are 83%. If we look at weather conditions, overwhelmingly again, we have VMC for both all accidents and fatal accidents. What phases do they occur in? Well, I think we need to talk a little bit about what the phases are. And we go back to our CAS definitions. Takeoff is 35 feet or gear up selection. Initial climb is takeoff to first power reduction or 1,000 feet above the runway. En route is basically from the initial climb to the approach. The approach is from the point of a VFR pattern entry or 1,000 feet above the runway to the beginning of the landing flare. And a landing is the beginning of the landing flare until the aircraft exits the runway, comes to a stop on the runway, or when power is applied for a takeoff in the case of a touch-and-go landing. A couple other important definitions are maneuvering, or low-altitude aerobatic flight operations, and the missed approach or go-around from the application of power until the aircraft re-enters the sequence for a VFR pattern for a go-around, or until the aircraft reaches the initial approach fix for another IFR approach for a missed approach. We get our data, we now have our definitions of the various phases, and we can find that by flight phase, maneuvering, approach, and initial climb are the deadliest phases. If you look down near the bottom, landing is actually, there's a lot of loss of control accidents, but they're usually not fatal. We can go a little bit further, and I know this is a busy slide, and I'll go, I've got a couple of follow-on slides that'll make this a little simpler. But if we look at the airport loss of control, again, we have one of our big three, the initial climb, and then we separate the approach, another one of our big three, into IFR, IMC, and VFR, VMC. Again, we look at the landing and flare and touchdown, and there's not a whole lot of fatal activity going on there. If we look at the IFR, IMC, again, there's not very many of them when we look at our big three, but the interesting thing is when loss of control does occur in IMC conditions or on IFR flight, it's generally fatal. Contrast that with the VFR, VMC, and there's also different parts of or phases of flight where sometimes they are fatal and sometimes they aren't. There is kind of a cluster, though, when we're talking about pattern-based to pattern final, and that would be your skidded turn stall or your cross-control stall. Conclusions. Loss of control in flight counts for about 45% of all fatal GA fixed-wing accidents and fatalities. Overwhelmingly, they're Part 91, day, VMC operations. The major phases of flight occurrence are maneuvering, initial climb, and approach. And then, although a small number of all loss of control in flight accidents, those in IMC conditions approaching an airport, will most likely result in a fatal outcome. I hope this brief presentation serves as a good springboard into our first panel, Government and Industry Perspectives and Actions. Our speakers will be Mr. Wendell Griffin, Director of the FAA's Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention, and he's also the co-chair of the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. Mr. George Perry, Senior Vice President of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association's Air Safety Institute. Mr. Sean Elliott, Vice President of Advocacy and Safety, Experimental Aircraft Association, and Mr. Ray Stanton, Manager for Risk Control Services, Old Republic Aerospace Insurance. The four panelists will give their presentations, and then Member Wayner and the technical panel will ask questions. As a reminder for our panelists, please push the button on the microphone to activate it and bring it close to you while speaking. Please push the button again to turn it off when you're done speaking. Our first panel speaker is Mr. Wendell Griffin of the FAA. Thank you, Mr. Griffin, for being here. Please commence.
Okay, good morning. As Paul said, I'm Wendell Griffin from the Federal Aviation Administration. I'm the Director of Accident Investigation and Prevention, and I'm also the government co-chair of the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. Before I start, I want to thank Member Wayner and Dr. Dunks and Mr. Cox and the entire NTSB staff for putting on this loss of control forum. I think this is a great initiative, and I think it's something that we all need to pay attention to. And we hope we're doing our part over at the FAA, but I think efforts like this, where we join forces and work together along with my industry colleagues here, pay huge dividends for all of us. So I will run through this fairly quickly. I'm going to talk a little bit about the FAA, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. And also, I want to touch on General Aviation ASIAS. So that'll be my last slide. ASIAS is we call it the Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing System. It is our I call it a decision support capability type tool. It's not really a database, but it pulls from about 185 different databases across industry, FAA, government, whatever. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. And it is also something that the commercial aviation safety team uses. Okay. I give up. Thank you. Okay. So the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee was it's a collaborative government industry partnership to share information, if you will, gather data, share information. We meet on a quarterly basis. I said I am the government co-chair. My industry co-chair is a gentleman named Bruce Landsberg from AOPA. It was formed in the late 1990s, and initially we started off looking at basically using subject matter expertise and subject matter opinion as to what are the things that we needed to look at. We decided in 2011, about 4 years ago, that we needed a more structured approach, and we needed to go to a data-driven type approach. So we adopted the CAST process, and CAST is the Commercial Aviation Safety Team. The The Commercial Aviation Safety Team was born in 1998 as a result of two major accidents most of you are probably familiar with or remember, TWA 800 and the Value Jet 592. After that, there were a couple of commissions by Congress, one headed up by Vice President Al Gore, another headed up by Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta, who provided the impetus for standing up the Commercial Aviation Safety Team. So the Commercial Aviation Safety Team takes this data-driven approach on the commercial side. We have adopted this on the general aviation side now, and we think that this is going to propel us forward to the next level of being able to drive the fatality risk in general aviation down even further. Some of the things that we focus on, it's a voluntary commitment, so it's a completely voluntary program between the government and industry partners. It is consensus-based decision-making. As I said, it is data-driven, and we look at how do we manage the risk using a data-driven process, which I'll talk a little bit more about. We focus on developing safety enhancements and implementing those safety enhancements, and then continuous monitoring and measuring of the effectiveness of those so that we can tell that we're making a difference and make improvements. And it's basically designed so that those of us sitting up here and all the members of the GAJSC can focus our resources on the biggest risks out there. This is how we're organized. We have the overall steering committee. I mentioned myself and my industry co-chair, myself and Bruce Landsberg. We have representation from across government industry. Below us, we have the safety analysis team. This is where most of the work is done. These are the real smart guys, and they do all the data collection, the data analysis, and they bring their findings and recommendations forward to the steering committee, and then we make the decisions and put things in place and go from there. And they also utilize work groups, which are experts from across both industry and government to help them in their efforts should they need extra assistance. So I mentioned we revamped the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee in 2011. So we did that by going to a data-driven approach, and this is how we started. We developed this Pareto chart. This is based on NTSB accident data. We went back and we looked at all of the things that Paul Cox just talked to you about, the accidents that have occurred in general aviation. And obviously, as you can see there, loss of control, the biggest problem that we see. So we decided to take that on first. To date, we have completed 3 studies. First, loss of control approach and landing, loss of control in flight, and then recently we just took on system component failure power plant, or basically engine failures. We've developed about 33 safety enhancements to this date. 29 of those relate to loss of control. This is just an example of some of the ones I pulled out. Like I said, we had 29 loss of control safety enhancements. I just pulled out some real quick examples, and you're going to hear more about some of these later. The first one is angle of attack. That was probably the biggest winner for us so far. We're getting great feedback on that. It was a great partnership between industry and government. We were able to streamline some FAA procedures that you're going to you'll hear more about in the 4th panel with Earl Lawrence about the ability to install those on aircraft and things like that. So a real success story, we think. And the initial indications, you'll hear a little bit from the University of North Dakota today. The initial indications are very, very positive that we're seeing some results there, and we're seeing some saves in pitch reductions on final approach and approach to landing and those kind of things. Prescription medications, we did an outreach program on prescription medications to pilots just before the summer flying season in 2013, letting them know and informing them about the effects of medication that they may be taking, effects of prescription medications and over-the-counter medications, and how long some of those things stay in your system and how long you should be off of those before you go out and operate an airplane. GA flight data monitoring, we're going to talk a little bit about that and how we do that in general aviation, because we really do believe that is the way of the future. Data sharing, information gathering, identifying hazards, assessing the risk for those hazards, putting safety enhancements in place, and then monitoring those. A mini SMS, if you will, done using the ASIAS program, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then safety outreach is probably the biggest tool in our box, and we do a lot of that. We do a lot of that across the FAA. We do a lot of that with industry. We do a lot of that with our partners up here, EAA, AOPA, the other members of the GAJSC. But this is a big tool for us. One of the things that we're doing at the FAA right now, we have a Fly Safe campaign going on, and it is geared completely towards loss of control. And this was kicked off in the summer of 15 by our administrator and deputy administrator. It is executed by our FAST team members, which are the FAA safety team members, which reside in our Flight Standards organization. There are about 100 of those folks, and they utilize about 2,500 volunteers across the general aviation community to help them get the word out. They do a different topic every month. As you can see, survivability is the topic for October. You can see some of the topics that we've previously covered and that we're going to cover in the future, which will be more angle of attack. We use a lot of social media, and to date, we estimate that we've reached about 1.6 million people. And as I mentioned, the FAST team members are out there. They're doing this on a daily basis. So very, very effective outreach program. Some of the other things that we've done, I mentioned the administrator hosts a General Aviation Safety Summit every year. Member Wayner attends that. The presidents and CEOs of industry and the companies attend that. We have some very fruitful discussions, and that is where a lot of our angle of attack discussions took place last year. Deputy Administrator Huerta attended AOPA's fly-in this year, kicked that off, gave a speech, talked about loss of control a little bit. Administrator Huerta went to the EAA Air Venture show in July in Oshkosh, and he had a Meet the Administrator session, talked about loss of control. And then, as I mentioned, I've talked a little bit about the FAST team seminars and loss control initiatives and outreach. So where are we going in the future? I kind of touched on this a little bit. We're coming from a reactive posture where we look at accident investigations, we do forensic investigations, we look at what happened, and then we go out and try to put in mitigations and prevent it from happening in the future. Where we want to go with ASIAS and the GAJSC efforts are, we want to get into more data collection, collecting FOQA data from the corporate and business air carriers. We want to get into pilot reporting, voluntary reporting. We want to get into SMS systems. We want to get into using iPads, iPhones, Garmin electronic devices to report general aviation data into the system so that we can enrich our data analysis, all in a protected, non-punitive type environment, all about improving safety. And then lastly, ASIAS, this is kind of a model for ASIAS, and you can see I equate this to kind of a mini SMS, if you will, and it includes everything that I've already talked about. So we sponsor programs such as InfoShare, actually industry sponsors it, and we help out with the administrative details. We had over 900 people in Dallas in September talking about aviation safety. And we're doing this for general aviation. We have general aviation breakouts. We take that information, we plug it into the system. We look at the data that we have. And like I said, we're trying to get more and more data into ASIAS. We kick that information. If there's an issue that comes up, we kick that to that safety analysis team. They do the analysis. They bring that to the GAJSC steering committee. We adopt safety enhancements, and then we monitor those and measure those to make sure they're having the desired effect, and we continue the process. So, to wrap it up, data-driven process, we think that works. We think that's the way of the future. It's been very effective in CAST in achieving their goals. We're well on the way to achieving our goals in the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. We think we're doing good work. We think we're on the right track, and you're going to hear more about that. So far, to date, 29 loss of control safety enhancements that have been put in place and that we are currently working to put in place. And then we think ASIAS is the way of the future. More data collection, data sharing, assessing the risks, the hazards, and then implementing safety enhancements to reduce the risk of GA accidents in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffin. Our next presenter is Mr. George Perry of AOPA. Mr. Perry?
Good morning, and I want to say thank you to Member Weiner and Dr. Dunks and Paul and all the NTSB for your leadership in setting up this forum. I think this is a very, very important topic and one that I think we all take to heart, because the data really shows that this is the percentage threat for general aviation is loss of control. So it's great that we can all come together and discuss these and hopefully come up with some solutions that'll help make some improvements going forward. So with that, I'm George Perry. I'm the Senior Vice President. I run the Air Safety Institute at AOPA, and I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that we are seeing and some of the things we're doing to help in this regard. A little bit of background, the Air Safety Institute was established back in 1950. Since that time, we've become the world's largest and most trusted source of safety education for general aviation pilots. In fact, just last year, we had over 2 million viewer touches that used all of our various products, be it courses or videos or quizzes or in-person seminars, our publications such as CFI to CFI newsletter. So essentially, outreach and education is our core competency. We provide that for free to not just AOPA members, but to every pilot. And our library continues to grow every year. So, we've talked a little bit about statistics, and here's the bad news, is that yes, 40% of all fatal accidents are a result of loss of control. Unintentional falls at low altitudes just don't give a pilot time to recover. So the trend is good if you look at it over time, but it's still fairly flat, and there's certainly room for improvement. One of the things that AOPA does to help educate pilots and give them that extra arrow in their quiver as they walk to the airplane is provide online education. And just one example is a course we call Essential Aerodynamics, and it's been viewed and completed over 60,000 times since 2008. Most of our courses are also iPad compatible, so we make it really easy and adjust with the latest learning trends to keep pilots and the information they need to be safe at their fingertips. Back, I guess it was the beginning of the year when the top 10, NTSB top 10 came out, and GA loss of control was on that list. In partnership with the NTSB and the GA Joint Steering Committee, AOPA said, we need to do our part. And so what we did was create a AOA indicators and loss of control awareness video, and we call it Margins of Safety and Angle of Attack Indicators. That video has been out on YouTube and on AOPA's website now for a little over a month, and it's been viewed thousands and thousands of times. When I go to the fly-ins or Oshkosh or any of the large events, people come up and say this is one of the best products they've seen to date. So I think the outreach and education efforts and working in partnership with NTSB, FAA, and the GAJSC is starting to make a difference getting the word out. But we're not just going to stop there. We're going to have a video series that talks about maneuvering flight. So every phase, Paul, you talked a lot about the phases of flight and the various accident percentages in those phases of flight. We're going to touch on every single one. So next will be a power on stall video that's coming out in 2015, traffic pattern approach to landing in 2016, and accelerated stalls in early 2016. So we're doubling down on this effort and not just stopping at the end of the year. We think this is really where our safety emphasis needs to be now and then going into the future until we can get these numbers down where they need to be. So what do we know? What do we know that works? And, well, we know technology works. And I'll defer to my colleague here, Sean, from the experimental aircraft side of the house, is that some of the enhancements that we see on the experimental side with AHRS-driven autopilots, with envelope protection, the kind of tools that protect airline pilots and commercial pilots that are out there right now are not available for general aviation for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is some of the certification hurdles that have to be overcome to get these safety-enhancing technologies retrofitted into the existing fleet of Part 23 certified airplanes. AOA indicators, we've talked a lot about that. And those are just incredibly important. The airlines use them, commercial pilots use, or the business carriers use them. The military lives and breathes off of AOA. General aviation, I think, has really missed the boat. And I know there's a debate about whether they're beneficial, what the benefits are for general aviation. But I'll tell you, for those who have flown with AOA, they never want to fly without it again. You know, autopilots with envelope protection, the latest and greatest autopilots coming out from the various manufacturers, both on the experimental and certified side of the house, with envelope protection. If you haven't flown with these electronic envelope protection and safety enhancing features, you really need to. It's amazing the level of safety that that technology now brings to the cockpit. And then simulator-based training with advancements in simulator technology, the ability to practice high-risk, infrequent events such as a loss of control, but do it safely in the simulator and learn all the stick and rudder and mental skills you need, and to recognize the precursors. I think, again, simulator-based training is an underutilized resource in general aviation, and something we'd like to see more pilots spend more time practicing and working with. And so, you know, what's the problem here? What is the root of the cause? You know, we talked about commercial airline safety has improved, you know, tenfold or eightfold in the last several decades. And general aviation safety, while it's on a positive trend of improvement, it's certainly relatively flat. So what I see and what my analysis team sees at the Air Safety Institute on the general aviation side is, for the large part, training really hasn't evolved. And the things that we did back in the 1970s and 80s are still the things that we're doing today in 2015. And this is by no means an all-inclusive list, but just an example to get the dialogue going. An example of, you know, for a private pilot, the practical test standards, AOA is mentioned one time in a 119-page document. AOA and critical AOA concepts are not required to be taught. And for the most part, a pilot can go through their entire flight training, get their private pilot's license, and never understand what a critical angle of attack is. And I'm here to tell you, if you don't know what causes the problem, it's hard to avoid the problem. And so again, another example is stabilized approach, something that commercial airline pilots live off of, is mentioned one time in the private pilot practical test standards. And I submit that a stabilized approach is just as important to a general aviation pilot as it is to a commercial pilot. Another thing in general aviation, I don't know why, but we've been teaching a box pattern for decades. And the box pattern really sets pilots up for failure because it creates the necessity to turn sharply if they overshoot, and doesn't lend itself to safety. A circular pattern should be considered an alternative here that would allow a more stabilized approach. And so again, this is not an all-inclusive list, but certainly an example of some very, very simple things that we can do to change what we emphasize, change how we train, change the way we fly to set the conditions for success and mitigate the risks with low-cost, easily implemented solutions. And with that, I'll yield the balance of my time back to the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perry. Our next speaker will be Mr. Sean Elliott from EAA. Mr. Elliott?
Can you get that clicker, George? That's all right. Thanks. Well, good morning. Member Weiner, Dr. Dunks, Christy, and Paul, thank you very much for having EAA participate. My colleagues here at the table, it's an honor to be part of this today. We all care very deeply about general aviation. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about, to add on what George and Griff have explained as many of the root causal factors, to add on some of the things particularly that EAA is immersed with right now to address and perhaps bring some of the innovative experimental solutions to the table that ultimately, as history has shown, can affect and greatly impact all of general aviation. So when we talk about loss of control and EA's role in that, it really is about the community and the freedoms that this community has. We've got a number of things underway. We've already talked a little bit about angle of attack and the importance of understanding that and also utilizing the technology that's available today. We've got an EA member safety pledge that I'll briefly touch on that really is a reliving of EA's roots and something that our founder, Paul Poberezny, deeply believed in. Way back in the 1960s, he had an insight and saw the need for really emphasizing shoulder harness use and the impact that could have in accident survivability. And before, it was very commonplace. Matter of fact, if you think back to the automobiles of the day, many had bench seats with barely even lap belts in some cases. He was pursuing and pushing our membership in the experimental community to endorse and take a pledge that they would in fact use a shoulder harness in their aircraft. So our current effort for this is the modern day safety pledge, and it really is about addressing the needs of current loss of control and how best to impact that. And it's about understanding in our world, from an aircraft construction standpoint, the need to do fuel testing, which resulted as a result of the data that was actually driven from the investigation and the study that the NTSB and EAA did together here just a few years back. And that's really meant to ask our members to take a wholehearted approach of looking at the importance of that. And then the evaluation and understanding of angle of attack and asking our members to pledge that they will study angle of attack systems and give serious consideration to installing these in their aircraft. We just rolled this out this year. This is a brand new pledge. And again, it's really leveraging the culture of EAA and going back to our roots as an organization and what works within our community. We're excited to see this take flight, and our members are just beginning to start to use this. Our next program is our brand new Founders Innovation Prize, and this is actually how you get to both that and the safety pledge on our website. I'll quick run through this. There's just 3 points of entry into our website that you can see, and ultimately get you to that safety pledge. Parallel to this is our Founders Innovation Prize, and this is brand new. We just literally rolled this out in the last 2 weeks with a full set of rules that explain all of the parameters of this. It's an annual prize. It's something that EAA as an organization is committed to over a repetitive basis, and it's going to be a perpetual award. We have significant resources committed to this. And the purpose for this first year out of the box is to address loss of control. And again, the EAA way of asking our community to step forward and leverage the innovations and the freedoms that we have in the experimental community. We don't have those constraints of certification. We don't have all of the requirements that a standard category airplane would have. And frequently, our community comes forward with very thoughtful and very much out-of-the-box kinds of innovative solutions. So this whole program is really about how do we leverage that? How do we bring our community to bear to affect this problem? Over the next year, we'll be taking submissions for a final competition at AirVenture 2016 for the first year, and then each year subsequently we'll have continuations of this with perhaps more loss of control themes, perhaps new themes addressing new issues at some point will yet to be determined, but it will be a continual, perpetual program. The top 5 finalists will be brought to AirVenture 2016 and allowed to present their solutions in kind of a Shark Tank, if you're familiar with that television program, a Shark Tank style format with a fantastic panel of judges. We've got Bert Rutan as our chief judge. We've got Dick Van Grunswen of the RV fame. We've got Rod Machado of the general aviation community, Charlie Precourt, who's a former astronaut and shuttle commander with NASA, and Dave Morse, a very highly experienced test pilot and Reno Air Race pilot. Great panel of folks that will be literally pinging these entrants and submissions in a final 5 showdown to ultimately announce the winner. The winner will receive from EAA a $25,000 cash prize. Second place will be a $10,000 cash prize, and third place will be a $5,000 cash prize. So there's a lot of energy behind this, and we're excited about how this is coming together. Real quick, just so you understand, the main criteria that the judges are basing their decisions on are top of the list is effectiveness in reducing loss of control. That's top of our weighting. It weights 40%. wide applicability. It's important that this isn't just a one-type solution. It has to fit the fleet and ultimately, hopefully, convey into standard category at some point down the road, as many of these solutions over time have always done. Ease of installation and implementation needs to be easy and simple. And then low cost. You know, George mentioned just a minute ago about some of the wonderful things you see in the experimental world. A big driver of that is the fact that they're affordable. You don't have the high costs that are associated with many of the standard category or type certified products that are out there. So we're very excited about this program. We see a lot of potential with this, and again, it'll be a continuation year to year. Another program that we worked in collaboration with the FAA on, and particularly AFS 800, was the launching of the additional pilot program a year ago. And we are very excited about what this can do. In our world, the experimental amateur built community, many of the loss of control accidents occur during the first phase of an amateur built flight, phase one, or flight testing of that aircraft. And there's a variety of reasons that drive that I won't go into today. But the bottom line is, while the EA Flight Advisor program has been around for decades and has had a significant impact, the ability to put a qualified pilot with the builder in the airplane was very, very important. And the folks with an AFS 800, Jim Viola and his staff were great to work with. And we actually very, very quickly were able to develop and get out a new advisory circular that is policy that in fact allows for experimental amateur builders to have a qualified additional pilot do phase one flight testing and all the critical components of that. As I mentioned, our Flight Advisor program has been around for decades, and it really is about setting the culture, bringing an experienced individual. We have over 500 designations currently that are nationwide, and those folks are really about being a mentor. They're about helping our members through that phase one flight test program. And the only thing that was missing was the ability for them to actually climb in the cockpit, and now we've solved that problem with the additional pilot program. Back to the culture. That's probably our biggest challenge, is we've got, you know, a recreational activity for general aviation pilots who frankly are doing this because they love it. They love aviation, it's a hobby, it's a passion, it's a pursuit. And one of the significant ways of truly making an impact of changing behaviors is to change the culture. And that's frankly what we have ahead of us. We've done that through many things, but first in line is some of the changes in our magazine and our information that's going out, our readability as far as materials within the magazine. We now have a monthly column within Sport Aviation that's being written by Charlie Precourt, who also is on our board of directors and the head of our safety committee. He's a NASA former test pilot and astronaut shuttle commander. Gives a great perspective on the important aspects of critical phases of flight. And whether it be phase one or just general flight, many of the causal factors of loss of control accidents are the same. And he does a great job of addressing them every month and helping to get that word out to our members. So EAA really does have a legacy of bringing its community to bear to address problems. And we are excited to do that again and help our members, and our members overall help general aviation to straighten up and fly right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Our final presenter will be Mr. Ray Stanton of Old Republic Aerospace Insurance. Mr. Stanton?
My thanks as well to the National Transportation Board for allowing me to be a part of this forum. It is a pleasure to be here today and to offer you our perspectives from the aviation insurance industry. Gotta go one. Okay. One slide's missing, Paul, so I'll just talk to it. One of the first things I did was to look at our claims rates to see how those numbers compared to those presented in the earlier presentation for loss of control accidents. We found that our rates were about 25.3% of all claims for general aviation aircraft that were associated with loss of control. That compares, as you'll recall, to the 17.4% that Paul mentioned earlier. I equate that difference to the difference probably in record keeping, as well as to the fact that we receive claims for which you would not receive a report. Those two things, in fact, may well account for that. The other thing we tried to break down, and I should mention at the start that we don't catalog in the same form and fashion as the National Transportation Board does. You have a number of categories I noticed that dealt with different phases in the flight. We tend to lump takeoff and landing all together as one grouping, and therefore it was a little difficult to isolate out uniqueness of a particular situation. But using your ratios, I applied it to our data, and we came up with 36.9% of loss of control accidents that occurred during the takeoff phase, 7% during cruise, and 39% during the landing. There were 17.8% that occurred during ground maneuvering, bumping into the building, touching the wing of another aircraft, those kinds of things that we got a claim for, but certainly you may not have seen a report for in that regard. Our viewpoint is, first I have to mention that our database that we maintain for our company, and I know it true for my previous employer, another insurance company, the database is built around financial management. It is not built around loss control or accident causal factors. There are some factors that are recorded, but it is of the subjective opinion of the claims adjuster that goes out to the site and looks at the accident. There isn't any follow-on to the official reports that would come from the NTSB or from the FAA or other resources. So it is a matter of record that is done by one person with a very short blush of a look at the accident itself, and therefore would be in question in any statistical review. We do allow others to do this kind of work because we're really not set up for it. Our claims adjusters are not qualified accident investigators in every case. They do have exposure and experience, but their primary focus and concern is handling the claim. When they go out to a site, their concerns are cost containment, the assistance to the injured and their families, and thirdly, the removal of the aircraft and the restoration of the site. That's where their interest and focus is, and it all sadly deals with money. We are a financial institution. The company, as all our competitors, are in this business to make money, and therefore that's where their focus tends to lie. And then thirdly, there are other helpers, as we've already heard from EAA, AOPA, our own FAA, and many, many other organizations, some of which I am a member. They are doing a superb job, and we support every effort that they are making. Even the ones that fail from time to time, we want to support those too. Fortunately, there are very few of those, and of recent times, throughout the use of the web, through Twitter, Facebook, and other sources, there is some outstanding material out there. In fact, there is so much that I can't keep up with it. As hard as I try to stay abreast of what's going on in the world, it's practically an impossibility. There's just so much out there now. Talking more about our insurance business, for your benefit, if you don't know this, and some of you may have heard these words before, many of our underwriters are not pilots. They have business degrees, they understand finance, but they have never had the exposure or the joy of operating an aircraft in flight. Few have opportunity to meet the insured, and that's particularly true when you're looking at general aviation. The accounts are very small, the numbers are very large, and there's just no possible way for the underwriter to go out and to meet everybody and to see their Cessna 150 or Mooney or whatever particular aircraft it is that they're going to be insuring. They are very specialized in their work. Within our department, within our company, we have a number of departments. One would work for what we would call personal and pleasure. That's your general aviation. We have airlines, we have airports, we have all manner and form of businesses that we insure within the aviation realm. And my department's responsibility is to go out and assist any and all of those with their safety needs and interests. Present time, most of those are interested in establishing a safety management system, and that's how we spend a lot of our time, is briefing, educating, and assisting them with the development of a good SMS that works for them. We do have people within the company, and there are many of them that are pilots that are very interested in what's going on personally. They do their very best to keep up and track with what's occurring out there and the offers of improvement that are made by so many different organizations. Some of those even track the trends and watch it. I got into a conversation just a few days ago in the office. One of our underwriters, a junior underwriter, in fact, had taken note that there had been a large number of Bonanza aircraft accidents in recent past, in his recent past meaning the last 2 weeks, that included the 33s, the 35s, and the 36s. There was no common trend among them, just there was, for whatever reason, a large number of them. And so we had a discussion of possibles that might be at the root of that cause. We have to always remember it is a business and it's profit-centered. And we are working with and against our competitors. Everyone's trying to get their share of the market. We do offer a safety consulting service, which is my role and responsibility, along with 2 others. We travel extensively around the United States. It is, frankly, the larger accounts that we go to visit because the margin and profit is there that we can absorb the cost of our business, our working with them. That does not mean, in our particular case, that we want to isolate out the individual owner, because we don't. We can't come out and visit with you, but we can certainly welcome the opportunity to talk with you on the phone, to communicate by emails or other methods, to help you if you are having problems or concerns in any way we can to make it a safer existence for all. Did I just turn it off? I think I did. So what do our underwriters look at when they're interested in a new account or renewing an account? First thing they look at is how the individual is mitigating those risks that are associated with what they're doing with their aircraft, be it pleasure or business, IFR, VFR, day or night, soft field or hard field. What are they doing and how are they doing it? They do that through the paperwork that they get. That paperwork is more important than you may ever realize in terms of how to keep your costs down if you want a good insurance rate for your particular aircraft. The more it's completed, the more substantiating documentation you provide, the better off you're going to be at impressing that underwriter and getting as much of a break as he can possibly allow. The individual pilot or operator will demonstrate a contingency planning. They have plans for the future. They have plans to upgrade their aircraft, to improve their training, perhaps a plan to go on a particular trip. They meet the industry standards and they do more. We're always looking for the more. It's not enough just to do the biannual flight review, to take your physical every 2 or 3 years and to maintain a 3rd class. We want to see more that's going on to impress the underwriter. Provides and receives training. More frequently is better, more diverse is better. The more we learn on different aircraft, different modes of operation, the better off we are as a pilot in general. Uses of risk controls, such as a risk assessment form. Nobody likes paperwork. I hate paperwork. But yet it's part of life. And that risk control form helps us to assess where the risks are going to be for any given flight. When they look at these various considerations, they're looking at the history of the claims for the account. For most general aviation, it's going to be none for hundreds of months, many, many years. And then there's just the one. Operators, are they flying VFR, IFR, business, or pleasure? Are they doing anything special in a special way? The training they're receiving and what they're planning to take, extremely important. In fact, we have a council that meets once a month and looks at flight schools to decide who is worthy of training the people we insure. So we look at syllabuses, we look at the qualifications of their educators and trainers, we look at their fleet if they have one, or are they using the insured's aircraft. All these things are considered and then it's quantitized, and it's only good for 2 years. They have to come back and renew with us and many of our competitors every 2 years. What equipment do they have? What experience do they have in their aircraft and what they're doing with it? The volatility of the market, it's a business. So we're always competing against those who are trying to secure that same policy. And lastly, how badly do we want that account? That is going to be the final decision that's going to drive the premium. We are involved in various organizations, the General Aviation Steering Committee. We have representation there. We are also very supportive of any and all training that's going on, not least to mention the associations that provide specialized training, the use of simulators. We certainly want to see the use of that. Enhanced training opportunities like upset recovery or diversity training. I'm preparing to go out and finish my glider rating, which will give me all 3, rotorcraft, airplanes, and now gliders. Personally, I like the gliders best, just a personal thing. We wanted to talk about risk control. I see my time is running over, so very quickly, there are 3 levels of risk that are discussed: adverse, normal, and loving. Not crazy about the last term, but that's the way the definitions flow. The adverse, we're all understanding of. We don't like the risk, we're not going to take it. Neutral, we're kind of wishy-washy about it. We might take the risk, we might not. And we're talking about a task now, or the individual. Do I want to land in this soft field? Do I want to land at this particular high-altitude airport? And those who are the thrill seekers. They will try almost anything with almost anything just for the thrill and the exhilaration. Those, as an insurance company, if we could figure them out, we'd avoid them. That's not always possible because usually they have the best paperwork too, and that's always a distraction. And that concludes my presentation for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stanton. We will have a brief question and answer period from the panel. I will commence with some questions, and then Member Weiner will finish up with some questions. Thank you very much again for all your time and your efforts, not only today, but in helping to reduce loss of control in-flight accidents. We're obviously on a journey, and I wonder if each one of you could possibly tell me, where do you think we are in this journey and where do we want to go? What are you seeing as far as awareness of your clients or even within your organization? I'd like to lead off with Mr. Griffin.
Okay, Paul. I guess I guess I would say, and I'm interested to hear what my colleagues have to say, but excuse me, I think we're at the very beginning of this journey. You saw the statistics, you saw the data. I don't think that's a problem that's going to go away anytime soon. I think it's going to require, as I mentioned during my presentation, I think it's going to require much more data collection, much more data analysis. As Sean mentioned, the culture change, reaching the unreachables, those kind of things. So I think venues such as this, activities such as the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, AirVenture, AOPA fly-ins, NBAA meetings, things like that, where we really emphasize loss of control as the biggest risk that we're seeing in general aviation and the biggest fatal risk that we're seeing in general aviation. I think those are going to become more and more important as we go along. One other thing I'll say, and then I'll hand it off to somebody else, but I mentioned the Fly Safe campaign that we're doing in the FAA. We started that last year. It's going to span over the next year into 2016 also. We're doing activities every month to address that and to educate folks. But I think a lot of it comes to we've got to get out there. We've got to go where they are at. We've got to reach those general aviation pilots. Oh, thank you. Thanks, George. We have, we have a lot of opportunities, I think, and I think we've got to continue these efforts. So anyway, I lost my train of thought there.
Mr. Perry, how about your thoughts?
Let me just interrupt a moment. The alarm is apparently a test for some other part of the building. Were it actually a fire alarm relevant to this, the enunciation would be quite different, including flashing lights on both sides of us. So this has been a test. It's only a test. We'll return to our normal programming.
Okay, Paul, if I just remember the question correctly, or where are we in this journey, right? I mean,
Correct.
And I would agree with Griff. I think we're kind of at the beginning. We talked a lot about data and statistics and a historical, perspective in the rear view. And it's important to remember that data and those statistics are lives and people and husbands and fathers and wives. And you know, it's a little disheartening that it's taken this long, and thank goodness we're here, to realize that, you know, this is the percentage threat. This is the biggest killer for general aviation pilots. And so I'll go back to kind of my notes in my presentation is that what we have emphasized for decades hasn't really been well aligned with the things that we see out in the field that cause accidents. And so, again, I want to thank Member Weiner for the leadership and really bringing this to the forefront, because I think if we're going to make a significant difference in general aviation safety, we have to talk about this. We have to educate pilots. We have to teach from the very beginning the basic tenets of AOA and critical AOA and the things that are available from a technology standpoint and a training standpoint that are going to help mitigate a lot of these risks. So I would say we're right there at the beginning. We've got to raise the awareness, get the buy-in. Those unreachable pilots, you know, we've got to reach them and show them the value. And I think then we'll start to see some improvements.
Thank you, sir. How about you, Mr. Elliott?
I certainly agree with my colleagues here to my left, and that we are at the beginning of the journey. There's no doubt about it. And it's going to be a substantial journey. It's not going to happen overnight. To me, there's two prongs to this problem. And the first, as I mentioned already, is one of culture, getting to the points George just made, reaching the unreachable, but most importantly, doing in a way that inspires them. This is a community of folks that do this because they want to. Their livelihood doesn't depend on it. They don't have SOPs to follow. It's not a job. It's a passion. And if we're going to be successful, we have got to create an atmosphere and a desire on their part to really participate. And EA has always had more success with education versus regulation. So that's the one prong. The second prong is technology. I mean, you look at the CFIT problem that we've watched literally go from significant to next to nothing. That's almost entirely been technology driven with the advent and easy acquisition of handheld GPSs with terrain avoidance technology that has made a substantial difference. So it's two prongs. It's culture and it's technology that's going to solve this problem long term.
Thank you. Any thoughts, Mr. Stanton?
It's been an amazing journey over the last 45 years that I've been flying. I can remember loop antennas and ADFs and trying to do an approach with an ADF or a back course localizer approach before all the technology was there. Part of the problem we see is the new technology is wonderful, but it's complicated. And in some regards, for me, it was easier when I had steam gauges because each gauge did one thing, and I could look at it and understand very quickly what it was doing. Now I have lights, I have different menus that come up, I have all kinds of things going on that I don't always fully understand. And it seems to me that in many cases, particularly with loss of control, it is that same kind of confusion that's happening for the pilot that's being exposed to it. They aren't practiced at what they're doing, they have not been properly trained at some time in the past. They may be tired or fatigued. They may be under some medication that slows their thought process. And all of these compound into an event that becomes unsuccessful and tragic in many cases. As an insurance company, we do see improvement going on. We see better equipment being installed on aircraft. Even some of the old vintage aircraft have some remarkable equipment now available to the pilot that's operating it. And they do, by and large, I think the population does well with it. But they haven't really. My worry with the technology is it's going to do things that they aren't going to understand. And it's going to cause that pause, that moment of panic that we as a human animal experience when we are confronted with the unknown or danger before we make a decision whether we're going to flee or fight. In the case of fighting, in this case, it's going to be resolving the problem and sustaining control of the aircraft. So there's a lot yet to be gained in the training aspect. We certainly want to support that and improve and see it and continue to improve. But also it's the culture, as Sean mentioned several times now. There is a mentality out there of those who are most apt to run into the trouble that I don't need this. I have every right to own this aircraft, to fly it the way I want, when I want, doing the things I want. And there are Fortunately, the vast majority of our general aviation population isn't that way. They belong to an association. They're involved to some degree with their activities, with their training opportunities. But there still is that dangerous grouping that feels they have every right and privilege to go and do as they please.
Thank you. Are there any follow-on comments to that?
I'd just like to follow up just a little bit, and it makes a good point, is that a lot of folks are going to do what they're going to do, and it's hard to reach them. And so solutions need to be simple, affordable, and present a value proposition. You look at the handheld GPS and the iPad and all the technology that people wouldn't even consider flying without nowadays because it's simple, it's low cost, and it helps. And so whatever this board determines as a solution set, I think we've got to make sure it fits in those criteria. Because if it's difficult, if it takes a lot of training, or if it's expensive, people are not going to do it. And so that's important to keep in mind.
Thank you very much. Mr. Griffin, you mentioned earlier about CAST. Could you provide any further information on how findings in CAST may apply to general aviation?
Well, I think what we've seen, and we're like I said, we're trying to utilize the same methodology that CAST uses now. So it is that data analysis that's done through the ASIAS program, that's then taken to the decision-making body, which is the Commercial Aviation Safety Team. We're trying to replicate that same process in the general aviation community, in the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. I would tell you that I think there are some similarities. We're very, very much in the embryonic stages there in the general aviation side. We have done, as I mentioned, 3 studies so far: loss of control, approach and landing, loss of control in flight, and then system component failure power plant. Each of those studies took about a year to complete for our safety analysis team, and now we're just now putting those safety enhancements in place and going back to assess the effectiveness and taking a look at the metrics and the measurements and how are we doing. When you look at CAST and general aviation, and you look specifically at loss of control, I think you can look at the effort that CAST is undertaking under what they have an initiative called Aircraft State Awareness, which, and George mentioned some of those things that are coming out of that, are envelope protection, enhanced stall warning, those kind of things, but bank angle protection. Sorry. Things that it won't let the aircraft do. So when we look at loss of control in general aviation and we look at the installation of AOA, angle of attack indicators, and the impact that is having already, and like I said, you'll hear a little bit more about that this afternoon from Earl Lawrence and also from the University of North Dakota. But we think you're going to see the similarities there between something that's going on in CAST and a similar activity that's going on in the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. But like I said, I think the important thing is we're trying to replicate the process. That's the real key takeaway. And I was talking to some of my colleagues before we started the session. I think as I look into the future, I think we're going to go down this same path. We're going to have to do this for rotorcraft. I think we're going to have to do this for UAS in the future, and we're going to have to do this for commercial space. So I see this kind of process only continuing to grow in importance.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Elliott, you talked briefly about the loss of control rate for experimental amateur-built aircraft. Do you happen to see any similarities or any differences in either the pilot training or the mechanics involved between the EAB loss of control and certified aircraft loss of control?
Unfortunately, very little difference. The loss of control of fatal accidents are almost identical. In fact, in the amateur built community, it's a percentage or two higher than the standard category world, but the causal factors are all the same. It is a matter of training and the quality of the training. It's a matter of what the pilot has in the cockpit available to him. And in our world, we obviously don't have some of the basic things that you'll see in a certified airplane in the way of not all designs are shared equal as far as handling characteristics and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stanton, are you, from your perspective, is there any particular type of training that you would like to see pilots take?
Personal opinion, I think that the more diverse their training experience has been, the better off they are. I know from my glider training as an example that I have a better understanding of energy management. And so if in the event of an engine failure, I know better how the aircraft's going to glide, where it's going to go to, and how better to plan for that ultimate touchdown. As a helicopter pilot, nothing comes out of the sky faster than a helicopter when the engine fails, short of perhaps a rock. And so your planning has to be well in advance, and it's taught me as a pilot that you have to plan and rehearse continuously for all forms of different tasks or maneuvers that you might perform in any aircraft. And therefore I've built a habit personally that when I'm preparing for a flight in an aircraft now, that I rehearse the flight over and over again. I look for the contingencies and I look for the possible occurrences that might take place in the course of the flight, so I've mentally prepared. Therefore, that pause moment that might occur when the unexpected takes place is minimized, and there are plans already running around in my head about what I'm going to do in the event that takes place. As an instructor, I've tried to instill that in my students over time. Some grasp it very quickly, others never seem to quite get the idea. So there's a mental ability, I suppose, that has to be considered somewhere in the equation. I don't certainly have an answer for that, but yes, I think diversity training is a very big plus.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Perry.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add to that is, you can't teach or train to surprise. And so when you think about how flight training and stall recognition and prevention has been taught for decades, it's a very benign, scripted evolution where the CFI is talking the student through it. Okay, pull the nose up, ease back on the power, and the buffet and the stall and the brake and the recovery are all very scripted, and nobody's really surprised. Well, if you look at the numbers that you talked about, all these loss of control accidents happen usually in the terminal environment, usually on either a takeoff or a landing phase of flight. And I'm pretty sure that if it happens to somebody, they're surprised. And so how do you teach that? Well, back in the 80s and 90s, simulators weren't, unless you were flying for an airline, simulators weren't to the point that they could really teach to the level of fidelity you need to have a realistic simulation. Well, that's all changed. When you look at the simulator technology that's out there, whether it's Redbird or just a desktop simulator, the ability to teach stall recognition, stall recovery, departure awareness in a simulator, and to inject those real-world scenarios where there is that element of surprise, that's something I think has been underutilized for general aviation, but highly utilized for commercial aviation for a long, long time.
Thank you. And I've got a follow-up for you. You mentioned earlier about the circling approach versus the box approach. Where are you as far as advocating that, and what impediments do you have to advocating that?
Well, I tell you, I'm a CFII, and when I teach, that's what I teach. And it's not just because I spent time in the Navy doing circular patterns to a carrier, but the reason they do that is because you can set yourself up, and even though you're turning, you're on a stabilized approach. Think of an RMP type approach for a commercial airliner. It's a turning approach, but it's stabilized. And when you're flying a traditional box pattern, it's by definition unstabilized because you're changing your angle of bank, your airspeed is changing, you're doing multiple things at multiple times, and it makes it harder and creates a problem set that doesn't need to be there. And so while the test standards don't preclude one type of pattern over the other. I would submit that anytime the slower things change, the easier they are to manage. And if you can create a stabilized approach, whether it's a straight in or a circular pattern, you're going to set the conditions for success because you make it easier for the pilot to manage because things change less quickly.
Thank you very much. An additional question for both AOPA and EAA is, what kind of feedback are you getting from your constituents on your efforts and the FAA's efforts to reduce loss of control?
I'll go first, George. Thanks. The feedback is varied in that most of the folks are pretty embracing of it, but as has been said several times, we're still not reaching the quote-unquote unreachable, and that's going to take a level of commitment and empowerment within the community itself to ask people to really go out and catch those folks at the airport that are not as engaged and really encourage them and bring them into that fold. People aren't resistant to the idea of doing more training and doing things that can add to the capability of their airplane and their flying skills. But as a rule, this is a recreation. This is not something that somebody's doing for a living. This is not something that you can go out and mandate. You've got to create an atmosphere that inspires people to want to do this, and that's our task ahead.
And I'll say the vast majority of GA pilots that I interact with at the various fly-ins and air shows and so forth all agree that tools like the AOA are important, and loss of control awareness is important because they see the data and they hear what we're saying and they get it. The pushback we typically see is, okay, you want me to install an AOA system, and the FAA's done some great things making it easy to do that, but still the costs. Your most basic AOA system for a general aviation airplane installed is somewhere in the $2,000 range, and that's a value proposition. Is it worth it? You know, I've been flying like this for years and years and years and years with an airspeed indicator, and now you want me to spend $2,000 to install this, even though they know it's good for them. It's like eating your broccoli. I know I should, but do I really want to make that investment? And so again, it goes back to my points. Make it simple, make it affordable, make it useful, and people will. And I think, the FAA's done their part. The manufacturers have offered products, but I think that cost-benefit ratio is still a little bit out of whack. And I'm hopeful with technology and solid-state AHRS type of driven type of systems that we can move away from the higher cost pedostatic or vane type systems and get a solid-state, low-cost, affordable solution that would hopefully that's coming. I assume, or I would hope, that one of the manufacturers is working on that. But I think if you could make the price tag in the hundreds of dollars instead of the thousands of dollars, you'd see wide adoption.
Thank you, sir. Member Weiner?
Let me just follow on to Mr. Perry's comments about installing AOA systems. I have to give credit to Mr. Cox, who is in the process of installing an AOA system on his Bonanza. And, putting your money where your mouth is impressive. Just a couple of observations. To follow on, I come from the era when stalls were taught almost as a maneuver. And the emphasis was not on recovering from stalls, it was on doing stalls, which seems to be just backwards from what the emphasis really needs to be. And the fact that stalls that get people into trouble are the ones that come by surprise, and the recovery is not done properly. Another comment, we talked about FAA has had 1.2 million touches to some of the educational material that's online, and AOPA's had 2 million. Given that the total certificated pilots, I think, is around 600,000, and active pilots is a little over 400,000, we've got a number of people who are probably doing very well in terms of interacting, getting information, learning new techniques. But that's probably not the part of the population that creates a problem for us. Any comments about how to get this information, this appreciation to the people who aren't going online and getting the educational materials?
Yeah, I'll touch on that. And, you know, I get this question a lot, and I think it goes back to what Sean was saying with culture. And a lot of us may remember the 70s and 80s, and there was a group or an organization that said, you know, our culture as Americans is not where it needs to be. And it used to be normal to drive a car home from a party or a bar and have had several drinks. And there was an organization that came along back in the 80s and 90s that said that culture is not acceptable. And you all know who I'm talking about, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And so I think it's analogous for general aviation, is that in order to reach those unreachables, to connect with those folks that don't access information on the internet or participate in any kind of safety seminar or recurrent training above and beyond what's mandated, I think we have to change the culture. We have to shrink the room for maneuver of the unreachables and make the culture so pervasive, just like Mothers Against Drunk Driving did, that we change the way general aviation pilots think. And, you know, are we boiling the sea? I would say no, not quite, but it's going to take a long, long time, just like it took a long time to change the culture in America on how we interact with our cars and alcohol. But that's what we've got to do. I mean, to reach those group of pilots that don't typically participate, there's nothing short of a cultural change is what's going to be required to get to them.
Well, very well said, George. That's a great analogy. I think of the image of the friend in the bar grabbing the keys away from the problematic individual, and that's ultimately what we really need to get to. Is it happens at the local airport. You know, aviation is a social activity. People hang out together. People do things together. Very rare do you see somebody that owns an airplane and locks it with a padlock in the hangar and walks away and never does anything around fellow aviators. We've got to get that culture to the point where even those that are not understanding or embracing of the important aspects of all the things we've been talking about this morning are really being grabbed by the arm by somebody else at the airport and said, "Hey, you really need to think about this. This is important. I don't want you getting hurt. I don't want my friends getting hurt. I don't want our industry getting hurt." So, absolutely correct. Culture, local airport, and creating an atmosphere where people feel empowered to make that difference.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Let me just add, sir. I agree with my colleagues here. I think it is a culture change. I think it's a big challenge, especially for the FAA, because we have to build that trust and confidence. You know, there are a lot of folks that are. If we want to go the way of CAST, if we want pilots to submit data, if we want them to engage with us, we're going to have to build that trust and confidence factor, I think. And I think it gets to that changing the culture, if you will. And I think we have to do it through forums such as this, through activities such as the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, the fly-ins, the Air Ventures, all of those kind of activities. Maybe a public awareness campaign, as my colleagues have mentioned. I think that's a great idea. Like a seatbelt campaign that we all saw in the 60s, 70s, where now everybody gets in their car, snaps on their seatbelt, doesn't think a thing about it. The drunk driving campaign. Maybe we need something like that on loss of control or on general aviation training, those kind of things. I know it's hard, but those kind of outreach activities to change that culture.
I am very heartened by the fact that AOPA, FAA, EAA, other parts of the industry are all looking at loss of control as the #1 issue. It's one of those issues that's been hiding in plain sight for some time. But the data keep staring at me and telling me this has got to be worked on. Just one last question. Now, we've talked a lot about safety culture, but safety culture is an outcome. You don't start by putting a safety culture in place. You get a safety culture. In fact, every organization has a safety culture. Every individual has a safety culture. Some not good, some great. Safety management systems was mentioned by Griff as well as Mr. Stanton. This safety management system, which is a concept basically applied to large operations, how does that translate to a single pilot, a safety organization of one? Any comments?
I can touch on that because it's something that AOPA has been looking at for quite some time. In fact, you know, when you look at what a general aviation pilot has to do compared to their commercial counterpart, a commercial airline pilot is professionally dispatched, the aircraft is professionally maintained, the weather is professionally reviewed, the NOTAMs are screened, and all of those things are presented to them in a way that's easily understandable, that they can digest and go flying and do it safely. And then there's also a built-in feedback loop. General aviation pilots, I say, they have to do what I call a pre-flight treasure hunt. They have to manage themselves. They have to manage their aircraft. They have to build a picture for the weather, the airspace, the conditions. They have to do all of this without any assistance. And I think there are opportunities, and we've been in discussion with the primary flight planning providers about how to leverage technology, fuse this information, and provide it to pilots in a very easy, understandable, and intuitive way. And so I think it's going to take a lot of the benefits that will apply from commercial SMS systems and bring it over to general aviation. And that's going on right now.
I would just add, I think, as I think about it, you know, traditional SMS system, there are four parts. There's policy, there's promotion, there's safety risk management, and there's safety assurance. I think if we could just scope that down to the individual pilot and get them to do basic safety risk management before they go out to fly, looking at weather, looking at prescription medications, over-the-counter medications, maintenance of their aircraft, you know, just a basic risk management type mindset and checklist, that would be a step in the right direction towards having an individual SMS, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. Risk management probably is the single most important key. I hate to do this, but we're running out of time for this session. I'd like to thank Mr. Cox for setting this up, and to all the panelists for providing the insights and information that you all have. We'll now take a break until 10:45 and return for our second panel of the day, human performance and medical issues. And so we stand adjourned until 10:45. Thank you.